Hello, everyone. My name is Teresa Chan, and welcome to another McMaster Program for Faculty Development event. I'm the Assistant Dean for Program for Faculty Development, and it is my extreme pleasure to kind of kick off tonight's event. I'll be a presenter as well in this one, but I know that usually I'm just your moderator, but tonight I actually have to present some slides, so pressure's on for me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about being social in med-ed, and I chose med-ed not because I want to single out medical education, but rather that's my personal experience. And so part of it is that this is my story intercalated with the story of, hashtag med-ed, which would be how we kind of label things on Twitter. And so for others who are not in medical education, maybe in other types of health professions education, there would be a different, if you were telling the story, you'd use your own hashtag within yours. So it might be pain therapy, like for some, or it might be nursing ed for others. It really would depend on what your story it is. But I figured rather than try to generalize things, I'm hoping that in telling my story, you'll have some things that you can acknowledge, and we can go through some of the uses of social media that I've encountered and used in my career. And so this is kind of how sometimes I think we all feel. Sometimes I think when we're actually out there as practitioners, if you're not someone who usually practices in a group, even me as an emergency physician, a lot of the time, even though I overlap with my colleagues, we're usually like they talk about toddlers doing parallel play. We're kind of parallel working. So we're not usually always working together. Maybe on the rare case, I might help out with the resuscitation or jump in and consult with a colleague. And I'm lucky in an environment that I do that. But most of the work, we kind of know what we're doing. So it's not like we have a lot of head scratchers or complex cases where we're going to have different people coming. And so what's nice about the isolation part is that as much as you can do your own thing as an independent practitioner, sometimes it can get a little bit lonely. So even though there's that kind of sense of independence, I think the dark side of that is isolation. And so what I found was that for me, I wanted to find other people to have conversations about what I do as an emergency physician, as a clinician educator, as someone who wanted to do different things. I found that I needed a community of practice. Now, community of practice is known in the sociology literature, anthropology literature as a concept that comes from Lave and Wenger's work, which talks about, they kind of studied a bunch of different groups, even basket weavers and artisans, and found that people who had the same practice often congregated to exchange how they did things, to evolve their practice, to learn together. And that's what they call the community of practice. And I think that that's a really powerful concept that I was looking for. And so I turned to my mentor one day, like at the end of my training, I said, hey, so how do you learn? John Sherbino is the guy that I turned to, and some of you might know who he is. He's at Sherbino on Twitter, and he's one of my mentors. And at the time, I was like, "What do you do?" And he seriously looked at me and said, "Twitter." And I'm like, "What?" I was like, "You don't go. You've substituted going to like academic lectures with like Twitter," and I looked very confused, a little skeptical. He's like, "Just try it, and you'll see." And I had a Twitter account. I had taken the time to start one way back in the day when I was probably a second year resident. My brother had sent me a link, just get an account, you'll want it later. And I said, okay. So I had an account, but I hadn't used it honestly until he kind of revealed to me that's how he learned. And so I figured out who he followed, and then I started following some of those people, started getting in conversations, and lo and behold, I found myself in a community of practice. And for me, Twitter was that community practice, still is for a lot of the things that I do. So whether it's faculty development or medical education, or now health professions education is my bigger mandate, and just seeing what people are discussing, understanding what the discourse is, understanding what they talk about for, especially during the time of COVID, it's been huge to have a lot of those connections formulate. And see all the resources and the experiences people were having, like some of the heartbreaking tweet threads from some of the Italian doctors. They were scary, but they were they were a warning signal for why we had to act, right? And so for me, Twitter has become a place where I get a lot of my information and news, and that has been a big part of like what it's been useful for me as a learner, is to connect. And I think for some people, it might be Instagram, might be a community practice. It isn't for me, but I know that a lot of our students, that's where they live. That's where they've grown up, and that's where they have their accounts. And a lot of our residents, that's kind of increasingly this visual medium that they use. So it's definitely that. And there's a bunch of other online platforms, LinkedIn, Reddit for some people. It can really depend on what you're interested in. And most importantly, it's about where your people are. Now, free open access medical education was a movement that was born and kind of synergized with Twitter, because it earned its own hashtag of FOAM, if you just have the hashtag FOAM by itself, FOAM, that's largely foam parties. And so there's a lot of people dancing and getting foam dripping from the ceiling. I guess that's a thing. But FOAMed is this education movement. So if you search for hashtag FOAMed, so hashtag FOAMED, you'll see a lot of people sharing resources with each other that they've developed, either as blogs, podcasts, infographics, all sorts of different artifacts. And they share that kind of resource with each other to help advance everyone's learning. And so we have actually recently written a paper. If you just Google a short history of foam, that will actually get you the article. It's from the American Thoracic Society. They commissioned a commentary from a bunch of us who've been working in this space for a little while. And it's definitely through the connections through Twitter that I actually met the editor-in-chief, and that opened up a door for me to be able to write that commentary. So he'd been following my work and wrote me an email and connected with me because of my online presence. So it definitely is something that I've come to realize is it's a big way to open up some of my world. Not only do I learn stuff, but I get to know people. And there's lots of people that I consider I call them my tweeps. So like they're like my peeps, but they're really just people from Twitter that I know, that I've gotten to know over the years, and they've cheered me on. They've helped me amplify my message. I've answered questions for them. They've done the same for me, and it really is a community feel. And it's been really cool to work with some of them. I've even got one paper back in the day when I was quite new to the FOAMed world. I had the good privilege of just getting into this thread discussion on Twitter that became a Google Doc and then became a paper actually in Medical Teacher. And we always joke about how this is the paper that was born on Twitter. And some of my colleagues who are first and second author are now super famous in the US. There's Esther Hsu, who's on CNN, I think almost every other day it feels like, and Megan Ranney, who's been doing a lot of the gun violence advocacy in the US as well. And I can't believe I'm like third author at my paper. It's pretty amazing. But all of that was born out of a conversation on Twitter, which I think is pretty cool. So that you can open up your network that way, I think is a different way to think about how we can use these social connections. Because at the end of the day, most of these hashtags, they often are aligned with the movement. They're not just a hashtag. And so FOAMed is one of those. This is our lane was the other hashtag. That's the one that in the US, when the NRA tweeted at doctors to stay in their lane, it basically broke Twitter, because that was the rise of, I would think, med Twitter, as we call it. Medical Twitter and nursing Twitter rose up to say, no, actually, gun control and gun violence is something that we want to advocate for, because that's something that's a healthcare crisis in our country. And that definitely sprung out as a talking point and became a big movement in the US. And now more recently, as we all know, the coronavirus work around Get My PPE, that's definitely been something that people have taken to the mean streets of Twitter to raise awareness that there's been inequities in the types of personal protective equipment that people have had access to. And then now the most recent thing would be around the Black Lives Matter movement and supporting people through the difficult times that we're living in right now. And so I think that Twitter truly has become this new space where we can congregate and have these discussions, hopefully in a productive manner. And definitely something that we need to talk about in terms of how we train our next generation or current generations of healthcare practitioners, is how do we intersect with that world? And so we'll be inviting, obviously, my two co-presenters will be formulating their spots as well. But definitely, I think that this is a conversation that we can start today, but it won't be something that will continue. Maybe you can continue it on Twitter, though. And so within FOMED, we've seen a big, at least in emergency medicine and critical care, we've seen a big skyrocketing amount. And you'll see that if we continue the curves, they kind of start to plateau, which is a good thing. Like we're all looking at graphs that look like this lately with the COVID virus, but in this case, it was an eruption of blogs and podcasts, not patients that were intubated. So it's a good thing that all these things were happening, as opposed to the graphs that we're used to seeing right now. So definitely there was an increase in the number of blogs and podcasts over the previous kind of like 2 decades or so. And now we're probably reaching a maturity where we're plateauing. We're seeing the advent of bigger multi-person blogs. I volunteer for 2 of them. One of those Academic Life and Emergency Medicine, Alien, so alien with an M at the end.com, and Canadian. And both of those are emergency medicine blogs that span a large group of people with hundreds of volunteers on the back end that make this happen. And they're out there kind of putting out content for people to learn and grow together. And Canadian last year got 1.5 million views. I think this year we're on track to break, I don't know, closer to 4 million views. COVID has definitely had a profound effect on our annual views. And we've actually had like lots and lots of hits in the last while since we've been putting out lots of content during the COVID crisis. But I think people are just hungry for more content to read and learn together. And that we've been trying to respond to that with as good as we can, the well-vetted content that we usually have that's written sometimes by learners, but always reviewed by staff physicians, and others are just by senior trainees or staff physicians themselves. But we also peer review all that stuff before it goes out. And so Canadian has been a big portal for us to develop some really cool things. I worked on something called the Frontline Primer recently. We had a series of blog posts come out, but they're all linked in this one little app basically that we created using Google Forms. And so people can check it out. If you go to canadian.org and then you type in Frontline Primer into the search, you can see the little post that we have, and it's a little app that we had for people who are redeployed to the emergency department, knowing that not all centers have needed this, but there have been some centers where PAs or physicians have actually come to guest star in the emerge, and wanted to make sure they were welcomed and had some resources at their fingertips to help them refresh. And so that's what we developed a couple of weeks ago in response to some thoughts that we might have to be prepared for that. And if you go on Twitter and just search FOMED, you'll see there's a lot of tweet activity, usually a couple of hundred tweets a day around this phenomenon. And I think it's because it's a powerful movement. And so what we can do is we can share information with people and really change the world, I think, if we actually start integrating some of this to this work with each other. And so the question I have for you is, will you start tweeting? And so if you go to twitter.com, the sign up bubbles are right there at the top there. You can log in, you can sign up. If you already have an account, you can just simply log in, like I say. But if you haven't, you can sign up. And by the time we're all done talking, you can probably have signed up for a Twitter account if you're able to do the 2-screen thing. But this is kind of a quick and dirty little summary that Sandra Vickers, who's one of my big collaborators online that I've really liked to highlight. She's done some great work, and this is an old infographic that she developed, but I think it still stands. And so, for instance, you can have your name, you can have your picture, you can have your bio. You can create a bio to make sure people know what you want. So go ahead and take a screen capture of this if you want this as a playbook. You can follow people who share content that you like, and you'll maybe acquire followers if you are generating content. But that's okay if you don't have a lot of followers at the beginning, as that does change over time. And as you interact, people will decide if they want to follow you. And then you want to make sure that you understand the functions. So there's 4 main functions: a reply, a retweet. There's a quote retweet where you can like retweet with someone else's quote subtweeted within it. And then there's the liking function where you can like something. And so these are all ways that you can interact on Twitter. And I think it's a starter pack for just understanding the functionality. There's a lot more rules of the game. And what I suggest for people who are new to this is to follow a couple of people that you like, for instance, like myself and Sharon, and Terra would be a good starter pack maybe, and you can see how we do things, maybe observe how we tweet. You don't have to feel obliged to tweet right away, but once you get the hang of it, maybe you could dip your toe in. And what I have here is we have the MedEd conference, which is the Medical Education Conference, CCME. That's a pretty safe account because they're very institutional, run by the AAMC, and they tend to be quite welcoming of followers. But then you can also check out other kind of resources that are out there. You can also take a look at some of the major journals. They all have a Twitter account. I highlight the emergency medicine ones because I think that they actually do quite a good job. Even if you're not in emergency medicine, you can see what they put online. If you're running any institutional accounts, it's nice to kind of pay attention to how other institutions do things. And then these are some phone producers that I've worked with. And so I highlight them mainly because I think they do good work and they have a good social media presence. So Alium Team has their account. EM Cases is run by Anton Hellman. And so he's actually that's his personal account. He embodies the podcast himself. But I think he does a really good job at interacting with people and putting out content when he's got new content. The Canadian team has the We Are Canadian, which is a play on that Molson Canadian call to arms a couple of years ago, but we thought we are actually Canadian, so we're the group behind it. There's the SGEM, which is the Skeptic Guide to Emergency Medicine, and Ken Milne is one of my mentors, and he's always kind of like done a really good job at doing critical appraisal in a fun way. I think that he's just, even if you're looking not for emergency medicine, I think that he's kind of an interesting character. He's done some really interesting advocacy work around immunizations and lobbying his local hospital. He has this mask that he puts on and he becomes Bat Doc, and he actually goes around and highlights different people in his hospital that have gotten their flu shot, for instance. And he actually did some internal QI work and found that by having a Bat Doc campaign, they actually increased their flu shot adherence rate to like about 30-40%. It was amazing. They didn't publish it, but I think that anecdotally that sounds like quite an interesting application to the social media stuff that someone can do. So he's definitely an inspiration to follow. One of the biggest podcasts in the US is MCRIT. It's an emergency medicine critical care podcast, and they've been around for a while. So they've got the MCRIT team. And then St. Emlyn's is another outlet in the UK. And really, because I'm an emergency doc, these are the ones that I follow. But you can feel free to explore, take a look at what they do. But I think that they're just people that have been doing this for a while, so they might have some hints you can pick up. But obviously, you'll want to try to explore in your own disciplines what it is that people are putting out there. So there's some cool people that are doing allergy work and immunology work. There's a whole nephrology subculture and urology subculture. They're very strong. There's definitely a lot of people who are in nursing and do nursing Twitter podcasts and things like that. So that's really cool. And then I think that there are less presence for people who are in midwifery and physio and SLP and OT. But that's not to say that we wouldn't welcome more voices and more presence. So obviously that's why we're kind of doing this development work, is to make sure that people feel empowered and connected. And so I think when you're getting up there, take a look at some of the stuff that other fields are doing and steal what you can and be inspired. And I think that'll be good ways to do that. And so now what, you've got your accounts and you've got it set up. How do you put it into your life? And so I think about it as sneaking a bit of education into your life. And so it's kind of like putting the kale in the smoothie. And so what I do is we put a lot of our content on the website, obviously. So this is an example of a blood and clots series post that's about anticoagulation in people with renal dysfunction. And then what we do is we make sure we have a Twitter account, a Facebook account, and we actually syndicate our resources through. And as you can see here, there's like a lot more people. Like right now, we're pretty awesome. We have 26 people. I'm really excited about that. But on Facebook, we can reach a lot more people. And so definitely, like on Canadian, we're trying to reach people. We're trying to build that community practice. And so it's pretty cool when we can have this many people engage with our content. And again, it's kind of like I said, having the kale in the smoothie. Like I'm not a big fan of kale, but if it's mixed in with blueberries and a good amount of yogurt and some goodness, I don't notice it as much. And so in the sea of cat videos and wedding pictures and baby pictures, it's kind of cool to have some learning. So I think that's why I like to sneak in some fun and learning, fun, and then there's learning that can go in between the pieces of fun. And so what I do is that when I'm waiting for something, I might turn on Twitter and I'll just kind of scroll through and see what I can. I don't try to read all of Twitter because that'd be too much. I follow about 5,000 people. I just look for some trends that I see in the content. And so sometimes if I was waiting for an elevator at McMaster Children's Hospital, the elevators are notoriously slow there. And so I might be waiting for a while. I might just check out Facebook or Twitter and see if there are some new posts or new papers that people have tweeted about, and I might like them and come back to them later. It might be that if you have a commute, so sometimes you're taking the GO bus to Toronto and you have a meeting there, or maybe you're from Toronto and you're just stuck in traffic. Obviously you can't do it when you're driving, but when you're on public transit, you can sneak in a little bit of reading there. And at the bedside, I think that one of the big things we can do is we can actually bring some of that to the bedside. And so what we can do is we can have all that content, put it out there, and we can look some of it up at the bedside. However, I think for FOAMed, it's not just another way to broadcast. We actually created like an online PBL experience a couple of years ago. It's the series has ended now, but we created this medical education in cases series where people basically discussed a difficult case about medical education and did faculty development online. So it was case-based faculty development. And what we did was we had some expert consults already pre-published and polished that we eventually co-published alongside some curated summaries of the proceedings from basically the online consensus conference. And so you can check that out now. There's the books are now online for everyone as free open access on iTunes and ResearchGate. You can also check it out at alium.com/medic. So if you want that, I'll put that in the chat in a little bit. And we've even kind of talked about our methodology in academic medicine. So I think that what I wanted to kind of pitch to you is that you can think about how you can harness social media. You can comment, you can ask, you can participate. And whether it's med ed, nursing ed, OT ed, PT ed, rehab ed, midwifery ed, I haven't seen that before, but definitely there's lots of room for us to grow our communities and to intercalate and have those discussions online. So definitely check it out and see if that's something for you.